They thought I'd be their shield, but I became their storm. The boardroom was silent when I placed the folder on the table. Inside were the documents, proof of every lie, every manipulation, every signature they'd forged under my name. Their faces turned pale. I looked at them, smiled, and said, "You promoted me to cover your crimes. But congratulations. I'm the one who exposed you." That's the day I stopped being their scapegoat and became their nightmare. My name is Liberty, and this is how my revenge began. My name is Liberty Hayes. I'm 32, and until a year ago, I was just another overworked employee at Haventech, a mid-sized software firm in Chicago. I used to believe that hard work and honesty were enough to build a decent life. My mornings started the same way every day. A soft alarm at 6:30, the smell of hazelnut coffee filling my tiny apartment, and the gentle hum of the city waking up outside my window. I'd put on my neatly ironed blazer, brush the wrinkles from my skirt, and whisper to my reflection, "Let's make today count." I didn't know that soon every counted day would lead me deeper into a web of lies. At work, I was the dependable one, the one who stayed late when others clocked out, who fixed problems no one wanted to touch. My boss, Clara Reeves, used to call me her right hand. And maybe that's why I didn't notice when that hand started to tremble. "Liberty, you're a lifesaver," she'd say, dropping another pile of reports on my desk. "Just make sure these figures align with the budget projections before the board meeting." "Okay?" I'd nod, smile, and stay another 2 hours, missing dinner again. My mom used to text me every night, "Don't let them burn you out, sweetheart. You shine too much to fade for someone else's light." But I didn't listen. I thought being loyal meant being valuable. Then came the promotion talk. It was a Thursday, late March. The air outside was cold enough to sting my cheeks as I walked to work, clutching my coffee like it could protect me from everything wrong in the world. Clara called me into her office. Her tone was soft, overly sweet, the kind that hides something dangerous beneath. "Liberty," she began, "the board's been impressed with your dedication. We're considering you for a managerial position." My heart skipped. I wasn't chasing titles, but recognition? That was something I hadn't felt in years. "Wow, Clara, thank you. I didn't expect this." "You deserve it," she said with that polished smile. "You'll be handling some reports and approvals for the executive team, especially financial documentation." If I had known what those words really meant, I'd have walked out that door and never looked back. That night I celebrated quietly at home. A cheap bottle of wine, my favorite playlist humming softly, and a stupid grin I couldn't wipe away. I texted my mom. "I got promoted." She replied with 3 heart emojis and a simple "proud of you." But things changed fast. Too fast. The next morning I noticed something odd: files left unsigned, figures that didn't add up. When I asked Clara, she brushed it off. "Don't overthink it, Lib. The accounting team handles that. Just keep things moving." Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. That was the first red flag. The second came a week later when the CFO, Mr. Bennett, sent me a confidential email with a file labeled authorization. L. Hayes. Except, I'd never signed anything like that before. I remember staring at the screen, my stomach sinking. My name was on those documents. My signature. Forged. I didn't know it then, but I was already standing at the edge of a trap, one they'd built carefully, patiently, waiting for me to fall. And when I did, I wouldn't just lose my job. I'd nearly lose myself. The more I looked, the less things made sense. Numbers that didn't match. Contracts that seemed rewritten. And every time I asked about it, someone told me the same thing. "It's just paperwork, Liberty. Don't stress over it." But I couldn't ignore it anymore. Late one night, after everyone had gone home, I stayed behind. The office was eerily quiet, just the sound of my keyboard and the hum of the ceiling lights above me. I opened the financial folders that Clara had assigned me. I cross-checked dates, signatures, and transactions. And there it was. 3 payments labeled as consulting fees, each transferred to a shell company I'd never heard of. But the signature approving them was mine. No, that's impossible. I zoomed in on the digital signature, my name, my initials, but the slant was wrong. My real signature leaned slightly to the right. This one didn't. Someone had forged it. My chest tightened. I took a screenshot and saved it to my flash drive. My hands were trembling, but I forced myself to keep going. The more I dug, the deeper the rot went. Every suspicious file was connected to Clara or Bennett. They weren't just careless. They were laundering money. And they were using me as the shield. The next morning I walked into the office, exhausted but composed. Clara greeted me with that bright, empty smile. "You look tired, Lib. Working too hard again?" "Just trying to make sure everything's clean," I said carefully. Her eyes flickered just for a second, and I knew she understood exactly what I meant. That day, the tension in the office felt different. People whispered when I passed. Emails started coming in with subtle changes, requests for approval, instructions with missing details, and messages marked urgent, but sent only to me. It felt like a setup tightening around my throat. Then came the board meeting. Clara called me into the conference room an hour early. The large windows reflected the morning light, and for a second everything looked too perfect, like a crime scene before anyone notices the blood. "Liberty," she said, closing the door behind her. "There's been an issue with last quarter's reports. Some discrepancies. Nothing major. Just some missing invoices." "Discrepancies?" I repeated, my voice shaking slightly. "The ones I was told to sign off on?" "Exactly. The auditors just need clarification. You'll handle it, right? You're good at that." I stared at her, realizing what she was really saying. They were preparing to blame me. "Clara, those weren't my signatures," I said quietly. "You know that." "Careful, Liberty," she replied, lowering her tone. "You don't want to say something you can't take back." Her smile was razor sharp, and in that moment I understood. She wasn't just protecting herself. She was protecting them all. That night I couldn't sleep. The city lights flickered through my window, painting lines of gold across my walls. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. I thought about everything, the late nights, the sacrifices, the trust I'd given so freely. And the betrayal felt like poison in my veins. I tried calling my mom, but stopped before she picked up. What would I say? "Hey Mom, remember when you said don't let them burn me out? They burned me alive instead." No. I had to think. I had to be smart. So I went back to work the next morning pretending everything was normal. I smiled. I laughed at jokes. I attended meetings and took notes like the perfect employee. But under the surface I was collecting everything, every email, every signature, every whisper that proved what they'd done. I was no longer their obedient worker. I was their silent observer. 1 week later, the first blow landed. An official notice from the finance department. Internal review. Unauthorized financial activity. And whose name was on top? Liberty Hayes. My hands went numb as I read the email. They did it. They actually did it. In that instant, the world around me blurred. The office noises, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, all faded into a distant hum. "They want me to take the fall," I whispered to myself. And that's when something inside me broke. Not in weakness, but in clarity. If they thought I'd be their scapegoat, they were about to learn what happens when the scapegoat starts fighting back. 'Cause I wasn't going to run. I was going to make them regret ever thinking they could destroy me. The notice landed like a physical blow. An official PDF with bold red letters and a subject line that felt like a verdict. Internal review. Authorized signature discrepancies. Liberty Hayes. I remember the fluorescent light above my desk buzzing in a way it never had before, as if the office itself was whispering that my world had just been flipped inside out. People looked at me differently that morning. The barista at the corner cafe where I always grabbed my hazelnut latte paused as if she'd seen me at the center of a car crash. When I took that first sip, the bitterness matched the sudden metallic taste in my mouth. My hands shook so badly that I spilled coffee on my notes. Dark rings spreading across strategic plans I'd stayed late to polish. The smell of burnt espresso hung between my fingers like an accusation. Clara's email was curt. "We need to talk. HR will be in touch." Her words were sparse, surgical. Bennett sent me a calendar invite marked clarification meeting. The calendar notification felt like a countdown to doom. I could feel the office humidity in my lungs, like I was living underwater and struggling for air. I called my mom. Her voice on the other end was warm and sleepy. It sounded like Saturday mornings and pancakes. I wanted to tell her everything, the signatures, the shell companies, the screenshots, but the words got swallowed by tears. Instead I lied. "It's a paper problem, Mom. They'll sort it out." Her silence on the other end told me she didn't believe me either. At HR, the fluorescent lighting seemed harsher. The woman across from me, Patricia, had that neutral professional face people wear when they've been taught to look neither guilty nor compassionate. She slid the paperwork across the laminated table, and I watched my name in black ink like a headline. "We need your statements." "We'll be thorough," she said. "I didn't do this," I said, voice small, as if loudly declaring it might make it true. Patricia's mouth tightened politely. "We'll need access to your work device and accounts. Until the review is complete, your system will be restricted." Restricted. Like a bird in a cage I didn't see until the door shut behind me. I left the HR office in a daze, each footstep hollow on the tile. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something else I couldn't name. Fear, maybe, or the trace of bleach that everyone uses to erase evidence. At my desk, people avoided making eye contact. Someone whispered accounting as I passed. When I checked my phone, my inbox had a dozen messages. A perfunctory "We're looking into this" from IT. A sympathetic but distant emoji from a coworker, and one line from Clara. "We all need to cooperate to get to the bottom of this." Her punctuation was perfect. Her tone colder than winter. That evening my apartment felt foreign. The city's distant hum leaked through the window. Horns and footsteps blurred into a single long note of unease. I sat on the edge of my couch, the fabric imprinting into the back of my legs. The cheap lamp on my side table threw a pool of light over unopened mail and a wilted grocery bag. The scent of my earlier coffee still lingered on my breath. I ran my fingers over the scar beneath my collarbone, an old private place where I measured stress by the way my pulse ricocheted. It thumped like a warning drum. My reflection in the window looked hollow. Liberty, the name felt like someone else's. I replayed the day in my head. Patricia's professional detachment, Bennett's polite eyes, Clara's thin smile. The betrayal felt textured like paper cuts. Each layer stung. The loss of trust, the humiliation of suspicions, the near physical ache of being watched. That night I dreamt of signatures drifting in a slow, mocking snowfall, each one landing on top of me until I could no longer breathe. I woke up gasping, pillow damp with tears. For a long time I lay there, listening to the building creak, counting the minutes like breaths. I had never felt so small. But grief has a strange companion. A clarity that arrives when you think you've lost everything. After the first wave of panic, anger replaced the numbness. Not the burning, reckless kind that destroys without thought, but a quiet, cold focus that sharpened my edges. I began to list everything I had. The screenshots I'd hidden, the flash drive tucked in the pocket of my coat, the backup emails archived on a personal account no one knew about. My hands moved with a precision that felt foreign and necessary. The humiliation hadn't dulled me. It had honed me. When the HR call finally came the next morning, my voice was steady. I answered their questions, wrote down my account, and watched as they nodded with that polite distance. After the call, I stood in the stairwell and pressed my forehead to the cool concrete wall. The damp smell, a mix of rain and someone's perfume, filled my nostrils. I whispered to the empty stairwell, "You made a mistake. You promoted me to hide behind me. You gave me access to everything you thought I'd be too scared to use." A small, dangerous smile slid across my face. If they wanted a scapegoat, they were about to get something else entirely. And then a knock on my phone. A calendar notification popped up. Board review. Evidence submission deadline. My stomach dropped. The clock had started. After that sleepless night, something in me changed. I stopped trembling. The fear that had haunted me for weeks turned into something sharper. A blade honed by anger and purpose. If they wanted me to play the fool, they'd soon learn that Liberty Hayes wasn't just a name on a forged signature. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by half-empty coffee cups and stacks of printed reports. The first rays of morning light filtered through my curtains, painting everything gold. An ironic glow for what I was planning. My laptop hummed quietly as I opened the encrypted folder on my flash drive. Every screenshot, every falsified transaction, every email that hinted at Clara's involvement. It was all there. The plan wasn't about revenge alone. It was about justice. But I'd be lying if I said the thought of watching their faces crumble didn't give me a wicked satisfaction. First, I needed information, real proof that would survive scrutiny. I started by logging into old server archives using an admin code I'd once been trusted with. From there, I traced payment trails, consulting fees, vendor reimbursements, executive allocations, different labels, same shell companies. Each file was a confession in disguise. And then buried deep in the shared drive, I found something that froze me. A document titled Crisis Protocol, Liberty Contingency. My hands went cold as I opened it. It was a risk plan. A literal step-by-step guide to throw me under the bus if the auditors found anything suspicious. Every part of it had my name. If Liberty Hayes raises questions, reassign her work. If she escalates concerns, HR review for instability. If she becomes defensive, initiate disciplinary process. I read each line with a mix of disgust and awe. They had built an entire escape plan around my loyalty. And that's when the real strategy formed in my head. If they wanted a scapegoat, I would give them one. Only it wouldn't end the way they expected. I began collecting voice recordings. I left my phone on during casual chats, pretending to joke about long hours or suspicious signatures. The laughter that followed, the careless remarks, the arrogance, all of it became ammunition. I called a friend from college, Eli, who now worked in internal auditing for a different firm. I didn't tell him everything, only that I needed guidance on handling irregularities. His voice was steady but cautious. If it's what I think it is, don't confront them. Document everything. Make copies. Keep one off-site. When you're ready, go directly to the compliance board, not HR. That advice became my lifeline. Over the next week, I played the part of the obedient employee flawlessly. I smiled at Clara's fake sympathy, nodded at Bennett's patronizing advice, and even brought donuts to the office one morning just to keep up appearances. But every night I worked. Every whisper, every document, every meeting note, I collected them like puzzle pieces of their downfall. Then came the perfect opportunity. The company was preparing for a major investor review. A high-stakes presentation led by Clara and Bennett. They were desperate to look clean, and that meant every report had to pass through me. And that's when I slipped in my ace, a subtle error in one of the drafts. It wasn't visible to the untrained eye, but it linked directly to one of their fake companies. I wanted to see if they'd catch it or approve it. They didn't just approve it. They celebrated it. That night I sat in the empty break room, sipping cold coffee under flickering lights, and smiled to myself. Got you, I whispered. 2 days later I compiled everything. All the data, recordings, forged signatures, internal messages, into a single file titled truth_report.pdf. I didn't send it to HR. I didn't even send it to the CEO. I sent it directly to the corporate compliance board and the external auditors who oversaw the company's investors. It was a risk that could backfire spectacularly. If I failed, I'd be blacklisted from every company in my field. But if I succeeded, the empire Clara and Bennett built on deceit would crumble overnight. And as I hit send, my pulse steadied. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't scared. Because the moment that file left my inbox, my revenge was already in motion. The clock was ticking, and soon they'd know exactly what it felt like to have everything ripped away in silence. The moment I pressed send felt like setting a fuse. For a heartbeat I sat frozen, watching the progress bar crawl until it disappeared. Then I closed my laptop, breathed in the stale break room air, a mix of burnt coffee and sanitizer, and walked back to my desk like nothing had changed. 2 days later, the office smelled different. Not the usual paper and coffee routine, but the sharp electric scent of tension, like ozone before a storm. Phones rang more frequently. People moved faster, their heels clicking like metronomes counting down to something inevitable. At 10 a.m., an email arrived with the subject line, "Urgent, external audit findings, immediate meeting." My stomach lurched. The conference room filled in minutes. Faces that had once ignored me now sat rigid and watchful. Clara stood at the head of the table. Her smile faded into something brittle. Bennett's jaw was tight enough to bruise. The external auditor, a woman with an unwavering gaze named Ms. Patel, cleared her throat and projected a slide. The room went quiet enough you could hear paper breathe. "We have identified multiple unauthorized transfers linked to shell entities," Ms. Patel said, clicking through slides that showed dates, transaction histories, and bank transfers. Several approvals carry the signature of Liberty Hayes. The floor dropped away beneath me for a second, and then something else happened. A ripple of discomfort passed across the table. Clara's hand went to her mouth. Bennett's face drained of color. People looked at each other, calculating, searching for the next safe place to point a finger. Ms. Patel continued, "We've also found internal communications indicating awareness among executive staff." My fingers curled into my palms. I felt the leather of my chair under my knees, the hum of the air conditioner like a distant engine. Then calmly I stood. "Miss Patel," I said, my voice steady, "I have additional evidence that proves those signatures were forged. I submitted a full report to your office on Tuesday." There was a pause so long it felt deliberate. Clara's eyes snapped to mine like a trapped animal's. "Liberty," she began, but Miss Patel raised a hand. "We received a whistleblower file last week," she said. "We are obligated to investigate all leads." The investigator's words landed like a verdict. Bennett sputtered, trying to regain control. "This is preposterous, fabricated documents. We will cooperate fully." But his protests were thin like paper in a rainstorm. The auditors requested access to all executive emails and scheduled interviews. Questions were crisp, clinical. My heart pounded through my ribs like a trapped bird. But I answered each query with the same careful truth I'd rehearsed. I played the role of the wronged, not of a vengeful saboteur. That was the point, revenge with a purpose, not vengeance that turned me into what I despised. Then things escalated faster than I expected. One of the shell companies traced back to a consulting firm with a postbox address in a neighboring state. The bank froze several accounts pending law enforcement review. The internal compliance team started sealing off access and printing subpoena forms. Whispers became accusations. Accusations became formal notices. Clara requested a private meeting in her office. Her perfume, powdery and sharp, filled the air as she closed the door. "You've ruined everything," she hissed, the words brittle with panic. "Do you know what you've done to this company? To me." I stepped closer, feeling the carpet fibers under my shoes, smelling the faint cinnamon of her desk candle. For a moment, the old loyalty flickered like a candle in wind. Then I remembered the nights I'd spent crying into cold coffee. The forged signature that could have sentenced me to unemployment. Maybe worse. "You forced me into that promotion to shield your crimes," I said. My voice didn't waver. "You thought I would hide your mess. I gave you every benefit of the doubt. You used me." Her eyes went glassy, a practice mask failing. This was never meant to," she stammered. "It was meant to be your perfect plan," I cut in. "Until I chose not to be your scapegoat." Outside her office, paper rustled and doors opened. The boardroom phone chimed. Bennett's name blinked on the display. He was being escorted out by security. Clara's face, which had always been so carefully arranged, crumpled in a way I'd never allowed myself to show. The rest unfolded like a sequence I'd seen in movies but never thought would be my life. Regulatory letters. A public statement framed to minimize damage. Resignations tendered in hurried, unreadable scrawl. Investors demanded calls, the stock, if we had one. The investors were at least threatening to pull out. Meetings piled onto meetings. I watched it all with a complex, curious calm. Relief, sorrow, and a strange vindication intertwined. They were losing what they had built on deceit. But that loss wasn't glee for me, it was correction. Justice, not cruelty. At the end of the day, as the office emptied into the orange spill of dusk, someone stopped me in the hallway. Eli, the friend from college. He grinned, tired and relieved. "You did the right thing," he said softly, clapping my shoulder. The hallway smelled faintly of rain and the glue of fresh pamphlets. I walked home that evening in a fog of adrenaline and exhaustion. The city lights blinked on like small witnesses. I thought about the line between right and retribution, and felt finally that I hadn't crossed it. Revenge had been a tool, precise, purposeful, and necessary. Not to destroy but to expose. As I turned the key in my apartment door, my phone buzzed. A news alert. The story was rolling out. My breath caught. The world I had known had shifted into a public place. The next chapter was beginning, and I knew the echoes of this night would follow us all. I set my hand against the door and whispered, not to myself but to the empty room. "This is only the beginning." After the fallout, the office felt like a place I had once known but could no longer recognize. Windows that had once framed my commute now reflected strangers. The hum of the copier, which used to be background white noise, sounded like a jury deliberating. Yet among that unfamiliarity, there was a stillness inside me I hadn't expected. A quiet made of exhaustion and clarity. The legal teams did their work. Investigators interviewed staff for hours, tapping their pens against notepads that smelled faintly of toner and coffee. Clara resigned midweek, her goodbye email a short string of corporate sanitized regret. Bennett was placed on administrative leave pending further inquiry. I watched the messages on my phone multiply. Reporters, old colleagues checking in, and investors asking for statements. The world had moved these private betrayals into the light. It hurt. Public scrutiny is a strange, serrated thing, but it also felt honest. That Sunday my mother came over. She parked on the street below and climbed the stairs with a plastic bag of groceries, and the kind of worry only mothers carry in their collars. When she walked through my door, her face was lined with a softness I had missed for months. She hugged me without asking questions, and the smell of lemon from her soap mingled with the faint residue of rain on my coat. "You look tired," she said, touching the corner of my eye like she might wipe away the shadows. She made instant coffee, the cheap kind, but it tasted like truce, and we sat at my tiny kitchen table. The dusk poured through the blinds and painted the plates gold. For a while we only listened to the city. A dog barking twice, a siren passing in the distance, someone laughing far below. I told her what had happened. I told her the details I felt she needed to know, and kept the rest inside me like a folded map. She listened, eyes steady, hands wrapped around the warm mug. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my fingers. "You did the right thing," she said simply. "Not everyone is brave enough to stand up for themselves." Her voice trembled just a little, pride mixed with relief. I let myself lean into that feeling, the quiet approval that fills the cracks after a storm. Work became a study in slow reconstruction. New leadership came in. Consultants pried through ledgers with the patience of surgeons, and compliance training filled employees' calendars like mandatory penance. Some co-workers left quietly. Others were let go. A handful hugged me in the hallway, their gratitude awkward but sincere. I accepted their thanks with a small, grateful nod and thought about how loyalty can be both weapon and shield. There were nights when the weight of what had happened returned. A sudden flash of Clara's smile, an image of signatures layered like thin, cruel snow. I'd breathe through it, keeping my attention on the small, anchored things. The kettle's whistle, the soft groan of my old apartment building settling at midnight, the way the moon leaned over the rooftops like a confidant. One afternoon, a former colleague, Tom, someone I'd trained my first week on the job, sent me a message. "Are you okay? Coffee?" We met at a corner cafe where the espresso machine hissed and steam fogged the windows. We didn't talk about court dates or resignations. We spoke about small human things. His toddler's first wobbly steps, a book we both loved, the way sunlight hits the library on Main Street. Those conversations reminded me that life still held ordinary joys. Even after betrayal, I learned how to rebuild trust slowly, starting with myself. I set boundaries at work and in life. I stopped saying yes to every extra hour just because someone asked. I began carving out time for quiet morning walks with the tang of autumn in the air. A notebook where I wrote without editing. A playlist that played only songs that made me breathe. There were lessons, sharp and simple. 1. Power is often hidden in small things. Access to files, an offhand smile, a delegated approval. 2. Loyalty is valuable, but blind loyalty is dangerous. And 3. Truth, when gathered carefully and shared responsibly, can be a bomb and a weapon at the same time. A few months later, I stood in a small auditorium answering questions for a compliance seminar. People leaned forward as I spoke about diligence and boundaries, about how to notice patterns that don't add up. When I finished, someone in the front row stood and said, "Thank you for showing us how to stand up." The room applauded. The sound was neither triumphant nor bitter. It was just the warmth of connection. As for Clara and Bennett, their names became a cautionary footnote in company emails and whispered conversations. I did not celebrate their downfall with malice. Instead, I felt a strange, steady peace, the kind that comes when you've done what you could to right a wrong, and let consequences follow their course. That night, I walked home under a sky washed in quiet stars. The city smelled faintly of wet asphalt and distant food carts. I kept my hands in my pockets and felt the outline of my phone, my wallet, the scab of a small paper cut on my thumb from handling too many documents. I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had weathered the storm and learned to stand where I had once been pushed. Standing at my doorway, I whispered almost to myself, "Revenge showed me my strength, but truth showed me what to keep." Then I stepped inside, closed the door, and let myself rest. When I look back now, it doesn't feel like revenge anymore. It feels like survival, like reclaiming something that was always mine. My dignity, my voice, and my peace. I used to think revenge meant hurting those who hurt me. But the truth is, revenge isn't about destruction. It's about restoration. I took back my power not by tearing others down, but by standing tall when they expected me to fall apart. And maybe that's what true strength looks like. Not the fire that burns, but the light that endures. After everything, the lies, the manipulation, the sleepless nights, I finally found stillness. The kind that comes when you realize you don't have to win every battle. You just have to stop fighting the wrong ones. Now, when I walk into my office, I see people differently. I notice kindness more quickly. I recognize deceit sooner. And most of all, I've learned that forgiveness is not about excusing their actions. It's about freeing myself from carrying their poison any longer. If there's one thing I want you to remember from my story, it's this. Never let anyone convince you that your silence is professionalism. Speaking up for yourself isn't arrogance. It's survival. You deserve honesty. You deserve fairness. You deserve respect. Maybe someone watching this right now is standing where I once stood, surrounded by false smiles, quiet betrayals, and whispers behind closed doors. If that's you, listen to me carefully. You are not weak for trusting. You are not foolish for caring. And you are not alone for breaking. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is rebuild yourself piece by piece, breath by breath, and come back with eyes that see clearer than before. So, if my story resonated with you, if you've ever felt trapped in a web of manipulation, if you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, I want you to do something. Backhand index pointing right, hit that like button, not for me but for yourself, for surviving. Backhand index pointing right, share this video, because maybe someone out there needs to know they're not crazy for feeling broken. Backhand index pointing right, comment below. Tell me your story, your scars, your lesson. I read them all and every voice matters. And finally, subscribe to the channel because together we're building something bigger than revenge. We're building strength, empathy, and healing. You know, for the longest time I thought revenge would bring me closure. But what truly closed that chapter wasn't their downfall. It was my rise. Because every woman who's been underestimated, every employee who's been used, every person who's been silenced, we all carry a fire that doesn't die. It waits. And when it burns again, it's not out of hatred. It's out of rebirth. So let this be my final message to you tonight. They can take your position, your credit, your peace for a while, but they can never take your truth. And one day, your truth will speak louder than their power ever did. If you've ever been betrayed, manipulated, or forced to carry someone else's sins, remember, you are not their scapegoat. You are your own redemption. This is liberty. And this was my story. Thank you for listening, for staying until the end. Because maybe, in some strange way, this isn't just my revenge story. Maybe it's ours. If you've ever been hurt but found the strength to rise again, subscribe now and join me for more stories of courage, justice, and emotional healing. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't payback. It's peace. Revenge showed me my strength, but forgiveness gave me freedom.